Since the Hamas attack on Israeli civilians in southern Israel's Kibbutzim and a music festival claiming nearly 1,200 lives. Israel's ongoing response has resulted in over 66,000 Palestinian deaths. The South African Jewish Board of Deputies has expressed grief over the loss of innocent lives and the widespread suffering caused by the conflict. The Deputies' Gauteng chairperson, Danny Mosovitz, told Ronald Peary that for Jewish communities globally, October the 7th is a day of profound mourning.
As the 7th of October 2025 comes by, we are all thinking of 2 years ago, the 7th of October 2023, which saw the largest number of Jews killed since the Holocaust. It was a devastating day for world Jewry, in which 1,200 people were killed and 250 were taken hostage by Hamas. So obviously we are definitely a community. It's a very, very somber day. But it does look like there could be some hope on the horizon with a possible peace deal on the table.
Now, how do you balance the grief of Israeli victims with concerns about the escalating humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
That is a huge concern for us. As the Jewish community, we are devastated by the loss on both sides of the innocent, of course, the Gazan civilians who have been casualties of this devastating war. Our hearts break for the women and children and innocent men. Unfortunately, it's war. And this is what happens. And that's why we welcome a peace deal, which will hopefully be coming soon.
And then as the Jewish community in South Africa, how do you view South Africa's vocal criticism of Israel's actions in Gaza?
It's really unfortunate that the South African government has not been able to play a meaningful role in the peace negotiations. It would have been such a proud moment for us if our government had been around that table negotiating something that is really meaningful and lasting. We are a proudly South African community, the Jewish community, and it's unfortunate that other countries like Qatar, they have played such meaningful roles, and South Africa, unfortunately, has been quite divisive on this issue.
Now, what are your thoughts on the South African delegation, which consists of several prominent South Africans who were detained in Israel while en route to Gaza to provide aid to affected civilians? What do you make of the detention and subsequent release and deportation back to South Africa?
There are good sources that are saying there was no aid on board those ships on the very same day that these so-called human rights activists were taken into detention and arrested. There were other prominent South Africans actually handing out aid in Gaza. So I worry about the theatrics and the kind of sanctimonious and self-righteous motives on board this flotilla, because there are actually people who are doing very meaningful work on the ground. And I worry that this was really just for self-promotion.
From your perspective, what are the critical elements that are needed for meaningful negotiations towards peace and de-escalating further violence?
So I think from Israel's perspective, it has always been, the conditions have always been to release the hostages and to demilitarize Hamas so that there is a lasting peace, that there is a negotiation where both parties trust one another. The conditions have never changed. Since the 8th of October, those were the conditions of peace, to release the hostages. There are still, I believe, 48 hostages who are still being held by Hamas. So that, and for Hamas to drop their arms and, demilitarize.
That's South African Jewish Board of Deputies Gauteng chairperson Danny Mosovitz speaking to Ronald Peary. And for more on this, we are joined on the line by Africa for Palestine Communications and Campaigns Manager Alie Komape. Alie, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, Lulu, and thank you for having us.
Now, Ali, Israeli authorities have notified DIRCO that South African citizens detained in relation to the global Sumud flotilla are set to be released and repatriated via Jordan. If I'm not mistaken, earlier on there was information that they had arrived in Jordan. But what's your response to this development and just the whole? The whole saga, the whole picture that we saw unfolding.
Firstly, they are in Jordan. It's welcomed. Their families will be happy to see them. There's a video out I saw just now. Mandela sending a video with not only South Africans but other activists who are on the flotilla. And we welcome it. We think it's great. They must go back to their families. We could only imagine what the children and the family members were thinking when they were in their horrific conditions in Israeli dungeons. So we welcome it. But the whole entire situation, Lulu, we can't have it. Israel has become a pariah state. Israel has become a law unto itself internationally. And we've said this before, and multiple people have said it before, that they didn't have jurisdiction, they didn't have a right, it was not their territory. They had no reason to abduct the South Africans. And the South African government has said it's an abduction, the United Nations has said it's an abduction. Everybody says it's an abduction. They do not have any reason to have abducted them. It's just uncalled for. Secondly, it's an aggression against South Africa. Quite simply, it's an act of war. These South Africans who are carrying the South African flag on these boats are protected under international law, and they cannot be arrested. Lastly, this entire idea, and I heard you talking to the South African Junior Board of Deputies just now, there's an entire idea that South Africans who were on these flotillas had some ulterior motives. Why don't they just go to Gaza through? No. The Israeli apartheid regime since October 7th of 2023 has killed volunteers from Doctors Without Borders. They've killed United Nations volunteers who are giving aid. They've killed Palestinian civilians who are in the press, who are medics, who are nurses, and so on. Palestinians and international aid givers have been killed in Gaza. There's no reason that Israel says no. They could have entered Great and they could have killed them. So there's no reason. Absolutely, there's no sound reason why Israel would do this to South Africans.
Now, there claims that in the flotillas that there was no aid, firstly, and then there has been a claim that this was just a publicity stunt. What's your take on that?
I mean, it's absolutely pathetic. And this is echoed by the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. And we must really put it on record that the South African Jewish Board of Deputies is a fringe group in South Africa that represents the proxies and represents the views of apartheid Israel in this country. They do not represent the entire Jewish community. Jewish people in South Africa are not a monolithic, and we do not represent all of them. There's videos, there are pictures. And of course, even when the boats were on their way, people like Mandela were showing videos and pictures of formula, baby formula, sanitary towels. They were carrying food in cans and so on. And by the way, when they were in Tunisia, if I'm not mistaken, where they were fetching more aid, there were videos and pictures of it. It's widely reported, by the way, by the press. It's not an Alie Komape opinion. It's not a Mandela opinion. It's reported widely by Al Jazeera, by CNN, and other media outlets that show that there was aid in the boats. It's just ridiculous. What they do, Lulu, is they will come to a platform like this and they will lie openly and belligerently.
Now, Ali, today marks 2 years since the Hamas attack on Israeli civilians, which led to a significant loss of life and an ongoing conflict. How does Africa for Palestine balance acknowledging the tragedy of the 7th of October with advocating for Palestinian rights and addressing the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where over 66,000 Palestinians have lost their lives?
What we're not going to do, Lulu, and what we're not going to allow is for Palestinians and those who support the Palestinian cause to justify Palestinians' right to live. We're not going to do it. We're not going to allow it. The same way we did not allow South Africans to go around the world to justify why they were opposing apartheid in South Africa. Mandela and his folks did not have to justify why they wanted the state of apartheid South Africa to collapse so that there's freedom in this country. They were jailed, they were put in dungeons, but they did not have to go around justifying their actions. We're not going to justify Palestinians' actions. What we're going to do is speak to the root cause of the problem, which is the occupation. The problem here is not Hamas. The problem here is not the resistance movement in Palestine. The problem here is the occupation. The problem is the apartheid, similar to what was happening in South Africa. It would be preposterous in South Africa during apartheid days to say, no, was Mandela justified? How do we balance Mandela's actions? No, the problem here was the apartheid regime. The problem in Palestine is the apartheid regime of Israel. The loss of life did not begin on October 7 in 2023. They were killing Palestinians way before that. The state of Israel that is established in 1948 is established on the ruins, on the bones, on the graves of Palestinians. Palestinians were killed way before October 7, and the entire charade that the problems that in October 7 are laughable.
Now, Alie, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies has criticised South Africa's government for perceived hostile rhetoric towards Israel. They've suggested that it hampers their peace efforts. How does Africa for Palestine view South Africa's current diplomatic approach to the Israel-Palestine conflict, including actions like the ICJ case against Israel?
Firstly, it's really rich coming from the South African Jewish Board of Deputies to talk about how the government diplomacy is working. These are the same people that supported apartheid in South Africa. Funny enough, I was just looking up at historical documents. The leaders of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies were whining and dying the likes of P.W. Porter when the ANC and their other comrades were in exile trying to fight for apartheid. We won't get any counsel. We refuse to take any counsel from organizations like the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. In fact, this is the trajectory, Lulu. South Africa, since Mandela came as a president, we had this moral authority, not only in the continent, but globally, to get into situations of conflict, to put people on the negotiation table because of our own history and to resolve situations. We've done it in Sudan successfully just now. We've done it in Lesotho in the past. We've done it in Zimbabwe in the past. We try to have the same approach to Palestine. Over the years, different presidents coming in, different diplomatic envoys going into Palestine, saying, let's sit on the negotiation table, let's see what we can concede, what we cannot concede, so that there's peace in the land. Through Yasser Arafat at the time of Mandela, through Abbas in the times of Mbeki and Zuma and so on. But it has not worked. The South African government is saying, we've been trying this, it does not work. Albert Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing time and time again and expecting a different result. The South African government is not crazy, they are not insane. And we are saying, we've tried this. Over decades, we've tried to say, let's go to the negotiation table. And there's only one party that's what's willing to negotiate. There's one party that wants peace. There's one party that always says, let's sort this out, and it's Palestinians. The Israelis are not interested in peace. How many ceasefires have they violated? How many peace pacts have they violated? So the South African government has every right to say, let's look at other avenues to pressure Israel into negotiating with Palestinian liberation movement. The same way that Apartheid South Africa was pressured. Apartheid South Africa was not backed. Apartheid South Africa did not, outside of their goodwill and good hearts, go to the negotiation table with the likes of the ANC. They were pressured, and through boycotts, through isolation, through expelling of diplomatic relations and severing of ties, they were forced to do it. This is what the South African government is doing. They're doing this from their own experience.
Well, Alie, we have run out of time and are going to have to leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update. That's Africa for Palestine Communications and Campaigns Manager Alie Komape ending that discussion. It is 12:30 Central African Time, and our news headlines up next with Jwalani Tulongwepe.
We are on Open Views Audio Bouquet.